Around 12 o'clock we heard machine gun fire. It was getting closer. 2 semi-trucks appeared on the road on the other side of the ravine. They were rushing at high speed. On the tarpaulin of one of them striped from the wind red crosses. Following them appeared several German motorcycles. They were rushing after the cars. Not far from us, the cars slowed down. Several men jumped out of them and ran towards the ravine. The motorcyclists opened fire on the runners and none of them reached the ravine. Then, having surrounded the vehicles, the Germans began to drive out the wounded from them. The sisters were dragged out after them. Then the Germans set fire to both semi-trucks. From the burning cars we could hear screams. Those who got out of the cars were brought at gunpoint to the ravine and fired at them. The survivors were thrown into the ravine. Georgy Kondrashov, the calmest of us, couldn't stand it. "Oh, barbarians! You bastards!" he shouted, grabbed his rifle and wanted to shoot, seeing what he could do at such a distance against machine gunners. It's unclear. We had to tie Zora up and use a gag. It would only have ruined us. Our cartridges would have been enough for 1 or 2 shots. Our nerves were beginning to give out. Many guys were crying, and the Germans were not taking revenge. They were just doing their usual work. Having killed the wounded, they put women in baby carriages and drove away on their motorcycles. It is neither possible nor possible to describe it. Remembering it, I am still shivering. The most unbearable thing was that, watching all this, we could not help the unfortunate, not even to prevent the massacre of the wounded. I have deliberately enumerated only the facts without commenting on them. Let the reader, who has the capacity for compassion, imagine for himself what each of us experienced at that time. After the motorcyclists left, we decided to go down to the bottom of the ravine and walk to the place of massacre. We hoped to find someone alive there. We found only one sergeant, wounded in the chest. When he breathed, air hissed out of his wound. The others were dead. The wounded sergeant was brought to our location. But Nerdinoff remembered that he had seen a hospital left in the village and went there in the hope of finding medicines. He returned with a few bandages and told us that a woman had agreed to take in a wounded sergeant. I do not remember well what happened in the village. I know that the wounded man was hidden in the cellar. I was given 2 boiled potatoes, the size of a walnut. I remember that Kermas asked a woman how we could get to the Don. I heard but did not understand her answers. "Leave me here," I asked. "Don't make things up." Kermas objected. "Hey, I won't make it anyway. We'll help you. You will." 3 nights we reached the village of Pyatisbianka, where, according to Frosia's information, there were no Germans. It was difficult for me to walk. I was falling again, but Pavel and Zora took over my ammunition and helped me. 2 more were leading me under their arms, cheering me up with a word. When our strength to go further was not enough, everyone stopped and waited until we could stand on our feet. I will never forget how, in the darkness, I felt someone put something hard and sweet in my mouth. I realized, sugar, a small piece of sugar, but how precious it was to me then. I don't think it helped me, but then I cried. We were already entering Pyatisbianka when we heard the rumble of many engines and had to lie down. The Germans were entering the village. In total darkness, several staff cars passed by. We were ready to go to the Don, but covered trucks with infantry. We lay down again. Through the cardboard-covered headlights of the trucks, narrow strips of light were shining, barely illuminating the road. Somewhere the Katyushas sang and shells began to burst quite close to us, near the vehicles with infantry. The fragments reached us. It would be a shame, having travelled more than 200 kilometers through enemy territory, to die here from their shells. But for some reason we hoped that ours would not hit us. When at last the shelling ended and everything calmed down, we got up and quickly, as far as we had strength, ran to the place where, according to Frosia's descriptions, we could get to the Don. It was getting light. There it was a wide ravine with gentle edges. I was almost dragged forward along the bottom of the ravine, and along the way there were vegetable gardens. Some of us began to look for food on them, but Kermas was hurrying me. Then suddenly he commanded stop. There was no need for this command. Everyone was already lying down. In our way there was a bridge across the ravine. A German was walking leisurely on the bridge. Even I could see his silhouette against the sky. Pavel pressed my head to the ground. Someone crawled to remove the sentry. Everyone waited tensely. Finally Pavel said, "Well done, guys," then grabbed me by the sleeve and dragged me to the river. "Don't splash. Enter the water quietly." He ordered me in a low voice and hurriedly put some kind of belt on me. "What is it?" I whispered. "Those empty flasks. You can't swim without them," said Pavel. "You can go in now." "Balayan, why are you standing there?" someone asked. "I don't know how to swim." "Then, how?" "I'm afraid." "Don't be afraid. Let's help." Someone grabbed Balayan by the arms and tried to drag him into the water. Balayan fought back. No force could make him go into the water. There was no time to lose. Someone, "Wait here in the reeds. We'll send a boat for you at night." Empty aluminum flasks kept me on the water like swimming bubbles. I could hear the boys swimming nearby. Meanwhile, the sky was quickly getting lighter, and I could already see the swimmers. When we were in the middle of the river, a machine gun started to work from the high bank of the Pietais Bianca. Fountains of bullets began to flash around us. Someone cried out in pain. Then another and another. People were drowning. The number of people floating was dwindling. I began to rake with my hands, but I had little strength. "Are you alive?" Kermis asked me. "Alive," I answered, panting. "Don't try to fight the current." I heard Kermis and stopped working with my hands. I was being carried southward by the current. Suddenly Kermis cursed and stopped talking. I listened anxiously. "Is it floating or not?" Pavlushka, Pavel," I called. There was silence in reply. Everything in me broke off. My strength left me. Probably I would have gone to the bottom, but the flasks kept me on the water, and the current carried me somewhere. The machine gun bursts stopped as suddenly as they had begun. I could vaguely distinguish the gentle left bank and the torn bridge, of which only a few piles remained. With an effort, I swam to the nearest pile and clung to it. There were a few meters to the shore, but I had no strength to overcome these few meters. I held on to the pile for quite a long time, and then I reached the shore with difficulty. The cold wind blew on me. I felt frightened. I was alone on the empty shore, shivering from the cold just in case I squawked a frog. It was a tentative sign, and to my surprise I heard a distant answer. I repeated the croaking again, an answer. I looked hopefully into the fog, hoping to see a man who had swam up to me. Soon the man appeared. He was limping badly. I ran towards him, but after making a few steps, exhausted, fell on the cold sand. Meanwhile, the man limped closer and closer. I looked and could not believe my eyes. It was Pavel Kermas. Pavlushka. And I thought you had drowned," I whispered as he came toward me. "Hey, I'd gone to the bottom to take off my boots and weapons. Otherwise I wouldn't have swam out. A bullet grazed my leg." "Is it dangerous?" "I don't know." Pavlushka, I'm so glad you're alive. We must undress or we'll catch cold." We stripped naked and helped each other unscrew our clothes. "What shall we do now?" I asked. "We will hide in those bushes over there and watch who is here, ours or Germans. And then we will act according to the situation. I have a grenade. I have 2 bullets in my gun. You don't have 2 bullets. Zorka and I took out your clip when you were asleep." "Why?" "Just in case. We were afraid for you. I was ashamed. I didn't mean to. I started to justify myself." "Okay, don't lie." Pavel interrupted me. Holding wet clothes in our hands, we completely naked headed for the bushes. As we approached, there was a trench, and in the trench was our soldier. We were so exhausted that we had no strength for joy. "No. Who are they?" "Mercy Piers from the encirclement." "Did they shoot at you?" "Yes." They threw overcoats on us and led us to our superiors. Mosquitoes pounced on our naked bodies under the overcoats. There seemed to be hundreds of them, and they stung us like wasps. But it didn't matter. The mosquitoes were up. Pavlusha's wound was treated and bandaged. Someone brought stew and bread. When the military doctor saw it, he shouted, "No, take it away now. Bring them each a slice of watermelon." I remember how I ran my teeth into a watermelon slice and lost consciousness. The unit we were in was a fortified area. Throughout the defense area were placed fugas, shells filled with explosives and incendiary mixture. When enemy tanks or infantry appeared, the fugas exploded, spraying incendiary mixture around. It was impossible to pass through this section. Here they already knew about us, gave us a few days to get back to normal, and then told us to report to the division assembly point in Prudboy. The chiefs of the fortified area did not hurry us, but we rather wanted to go to Prudboy to find out which of our men had managed to cross the Having parted with our hosts, Kermis and I went out on the road. We hoped that one of the cars would take us to Prudboy, but the cars drove by at high speed, paying no attention to our raised hands and to the fact that Paul's leg was bandaged and he was leaning on us. It was offensive. Then some driver agreed to give us a ride. He smelled a little of vodka, and we thought that explained his kindness. We climbed into the back of the truck, sat down on some crates and drove off in the breeze. Something strange was happening to the truck. First it drove down the road, barely dodging oncoming cars. Then it turned off the road into a field and drove over bumps. Crates bounced underneath us. The car almost rolled. We realized that the driver was drunk and that the further we drove, the more he was going around. A ride with the wind. Pavel laughed. Do you know what crates we are sitting on? It doesn't matter. As long as the car doesn't turn over, I answered. We are sitting on shell fuses. Only now I noticed the inscriptions on the crates. Yes, they were fuses. And although I knew that the fuses are protected against accidental detonation, they are not designed for such dangerous transportation, I thought. It was clear why the cars passing us didn't stop. They were carrying dangerous cargo. Every time the car bounced on a bump and the crates bounced under us, we flew up in the air and for some reason laughed. That at the front at assessments and humour is different than in peaceful conditions. It ended with the car driving into a haystack and stalling. We got down on the ground and looked into the cabin. The driver was asleep with his head on the steering wheel. We pulled him out of the cab, carried him a respectful distance from the car and left him there. There were several kilometres to Prudboy. We decided to get there on our own. They walked silently along the roadside. Suddenly Pavlusha said out of the blue, "And Kondrashov is alive." "It would be good," I said. "But why do you think so?" "And he's alive. Shall we argue?" "About this I do not want to argue. I don't like mysticism. But Zora is alive after all." Pavel insisted. "Look at the ground. You see?" I looked at the ground, but I saw nothing but numerous traces of soldiers' boots in the sand. Stop being so dark. I got angry. I'm not in the mood for jokes now. Pavel squatted down and pointed to one of the footprints. "This is his trail." "What makes you think that?" "When the Katyusha hit the Germans in Patisbianka, I was lying behind Zhurka and saw a shrapnel mark on his heel. I'd like to believe it, but I can't. Suit yourself, but I'm not joking." On the way we stopped at some part of the place. It wasn't the part we were interested in, it was the kitchen. The generous cook gave us a whole tray of fried potatoes, 20 portions. We ate all of them and filled our pockets with breadcrumbs. The cook was surprised. For many months afterward we stuffed our pockets with breadcrumbs and hid the breadcrumbs under our pillow. It wasn't just us who did this, but everyone who went through the famine with us. "Hunger syndrome," said the military feldsher. In Prudboy, the few survivors had gathered. General Yutvenko lightly scolded us for losing our weapons. Many swam out without weapons. In other circumstances it would have been a criminal case, but now we got off with a reprimand. Yutvenko brought a truckload of rifles and machine guns to Prudboy. We were just over 80 men. The command allocated us a defensive area of 6 kilometers. The Germans at this time did not put much pressure on us, and we simulated that there were many of us, running from position to position and opening fire from there. There were losses both at us and at them, but it was not in any comparison with that meat grinder, which we had to experience in the Big Bend of the Don. Not far from Ezovka Station, there was a ravine where the remnants of our division were located. I do not remember for what reason, but General Yudvenko was not among us. We were commanded by a captain. We suffered losses mainly from enemy artillery. We were short of ammunition. The power of radio stations was long used up, and they did not work. Our beam was in pin. By order of the captain, I have twice sent fighters with packages to the headquarters of the 62nd Army with a request to send ammunition, batteries for communication and soldiers, but to no avail. Our situation was almost hopeless. Each battle has its own face, but in general they all resemble each other. Small joys and fortunes, the loss of comrades. Those who died, for them all problems ended, and the living continued to fight. This episode is remembered to me more than others. In the morning there was an artillery raid. In my company, reduced to the size of an incomplete platoon, 2 soldiers were wounded. Dressing them, the doctor complained about the lack of medicines. A shell exploded close to me, and I leaned back. Right in front of my face, something smacked against the wall of the trench. It was a piece from the bottom of the shell. I touched it with my finger. It was hot. God must be protecting you, Lieutenant. If that fool had smashed against your head, then I heard the voice of the staff officer. Where'd you come from? I'm here for you. Captain calls. I got up and followed the officer. No sooner had we taken a few steps than there was a new artillery attack. The Germans didn't see us and hit the squares. The raid was over, I got up from the ground, and the staff officer did not rise. A shrapnel crushed his heel. I began to call for a doctor. Instead of him came an elderly military officer. I called for Sergei Krisenfovich. I shouted, Sergei Krisenfovich has been killed. Mas shouted back to me in response to the paramedic. How? I didn't understand. And so answered me the paramedic. He was already bandaging the officer's foot. Blood was flowing from the wound. Then we together with the paramedic carried the wounded man to the shelter. Why don't you show up on time? The captain asked me sternly. I sent an officer for you half an hour ago. He is badly wounded, I answered. The captain turned visibly pale and remained silent for a long time. Then he came at me in the same stern manner. I ordered you to send reliable men with packages. Where are they? Why is there no answer? Hey, something must have happened to them. It's war, Comrade Captain. You'll go with the package yourself if you can't find reliable men? Permission to take one more man with you? Go ahead. Another man from me will go with you, said the lieutenant from Smersh. It will be more reliable, confirmed the captain, handing me a package. The military field headquarters of the Stalingrad front was moved forward 40 kilometers west of the city. We had to overcome a dangerous area where the pincers had not yet closed and deliver a package to the GPO. We quickly packed up and went to the place where the passage was not blocked yet, and shells continued to burst over our gully, showering deadly shrapnel on the troops who had settled in the gully. On this day a joyful event occurred. A frame appeared over our gully. It flew at a low altitude, knowing that we have no anti-aircraft guns or field artillery. Some soldier shot at it with an anti-tank gun, and the frame collapsed to the ground. This was an event. During all the fighting we had not managed to shoot down the frame. Everyone was excited. A man ran past us with his jaw torn off. His tongue was sticking out of the wound and blood was trickling out. It was so scary that it was etched in my memory forever, associated with the hit frame. I even remember how the unfortunate man moaned and how I wanted to help him, but neither I nor my comrades could do anything, only showed him the direction to the medical station. By evening we reached the place where the pincers had not yet closed. Outwardly there was calm, Only a large number of corpses scattered across the field warned of the danger. I ordered to lie low and wait. Wait for what? Objected the young suicide bomber. People are dying there, and we— All right, shut up. The young suicide bomber was silent for a few minutes, pouted his lips, cursed and, calling us cowards, crawled resolutely forward. Pavlusha managed to grab his leg. "Where are you going, you fool?" The soldier pulled his foot out of his wide boot and stubbornly crawled forward. In a few minutes he was already shouting, "Oh, brothers, help! I've been wounded." "Why the hell did you come?" I shouted. "Help," the recent hero repeated pitifully. "Where are you wounded?" shouted Kermis. "In the leg." "Oh, it hurts." "Is there much blood?" "Hey, a lot." "Nettie, pull yourself over the hill and tie a tourniquet around the leg above the wound." A shot rang out, and the boy cried out again. What's the matter with you?" I asked. "In the same leg." "Pull yourself up over the hillock, they tell you, and pull your leg over with a tourniquet." We saw the soldier pull himself up and hide from the shots behind the knoll. He couldn't get the tourniquet, so he asked, "Help." "Wait till dark, you fool. Damn you for setting an example." But I couldn't stand it and helped him. "You're taking a risk." Kermis didn't approve of my action. I felt sorry for the boy. He was a year and a half younger than us, but he seemed a boy to us. Darkness comes quickly in the south in summer, but it seemed to us that it did not come for a long time. When at last it was dark, after waiting for the flare, we crawled up to the wounded man and helped him to get a good tourniquet. Both wounds were serious. I put him on my back, and in this way we dragged him forward by short sprints or by crawling. When we were tired, we passed the wounded man to each other. Crawling along one place, we heard a faint murmur. "Shoot him, brothers." We delayed. A flare flashed in the sky, and we saw a terrible picture. A young boy was lying face up on the ground, and his legs, slightly at an angle to his torso, were turned downwards. His spine was broken. He was in terrible agony, and it was clear that he was no longer alive. But the flare went out, and we, having run a few meters forward, fell to the ground, and the wounded man cursed us and begged us to shoot him. On me at this time was the wounded man. I was lying face to the ground. Pavlusha was free. He got up and went back to the wounded man. "No. Close your eyes, lad." I heard Pavel's voice. "Shoot. Don't go," the boy asked. A short burst. Pavel came back and fell beside me. In the light of the rocket I saw his face. It seemed crazy to me. By dawn we had passed the danger zone and could move at full height. Now I realize that it's not fiction. It's a special mental state. It's close to being intoxicated by drugs. The body weighs nothing. Fear, even unconscious, has disappeared completely. You feel light and cheerful, and everything around you seems bright and light. Kondrashov's rifle jammed. We had such a new weapon, a semi-automatic rifle SVT, but as soon as a grain of sand hit it, it malfunctioned. Despite the fierce battle, I got up to my full height, came to Kondrashov's trench, lowered my rifle into the SVT barrel and knocked out the stuck cartridge with the butt of the rifle. It was not heroic in any way. On the contrary, it was reckless. I heard the whistling of bullets, but fortunately none hit me. 2 German tanks appeared and opened fire on us. Our losses increased. From below on a steep slope, a Jewish political officer ran past us, ducking to the ground. "Now we will show them." He threw on the run. Some soldier took aim at his back. Kondrashov bent the barrel of his rifle to the ground. "Are you crazy?" "We'll show them." "And he's running to the rear." "You lousy coward." Snapped at him. The tanks were approaching, firing. A cannon fired behind us. I turned back. About 50 meters away from us, the political officer was firing at the tanks from an open position. One tank caught fire. The other one fell back and began to leave the back. What was that? The soldiers jumped to their feet and, shaking their rifles above their heads, began to dance on the trenches. but machine gun fire and artillery cooled our joy. Shells began to burst around our cannon, and it fell silent, crouching down. The polytruck was killed. The truck that pulled the cannon here caught fire. The firefight resumed, just to hold out until dark, everyone thought. But, as luck would have it, darkness was approaching unbearably slowly. It seemed that the sun was frozen in place, and every light minute cost many lives. And yet, as always, in due time, evening was approaching. The anti-tank gun, mangled by shells, turned into a pile of iron. Not far from it, a semi-truck was burning. Black as soot, the smoke from the burning ramp was drifting over the ground. The wind carried it somewhere to the southeast. Smoke screen flashed through my brain. Whoever wants it, follow me. I shouted and ran up the slope to hide in the smoke. 20 men rushed after me. In the black smoke, we ran wherever the wind took us. The smoke became less and less frequent, but the advancing darkness now hid us from the enemy. We ran on, and only when a small brook blocked our way did we fall into it and drank the fresh water greedily. I think we're gone. Said someone in the darkness. We have gone, but the others have stayed. Another voice sounded sadly in the darkness. I, too, was tormented by this thought. It was weighing on my soul and preventing me from thinking about what was important. I brought these people with me. Now I was responsible for their lives. Where should I lead them? As I thought. Those who, like us, break out will tend to the east. The Germans will organize barriers. There would be fighting again, and ammunition would be scarce. I knew it. I had 2 cartridges left in my carbine. What to do? Meanwhile, time was running out. I got up on my feet and went out into the night. All the others followed me. We passed through a flat field, crossed a country road. It ran parallel to the stream. We started to climb a hillock. Suddenly a flare rocket flew into the air. We all fell to the ground. We heard the roar of the engine. The car was coming towards us. We lay still and waited to see what would happen. The car pulled up and stopped on the road against us. The Germans exchanged short remarks in a low voice. Then they lit a searchlight and began to shine the beam on our backs. We didn't move. We lay there, holding our breath. The Germans must have taken us for dead, but if they had doubted and shot at least one of us to check, we would have all died. Our ammunition would not have been enough for a short fight, and the patrol car, we knew, had a machine gun. The spotlight stopped on my back. I felt uneasy. It could have been followed by a gunshot. What a stupid death, I thought. But the beam went to the left, travelled over the backs of the other soldiers and went out. The car moved on. As soon as the sound of the engine died down, we jumped to our feet and ran up the hill. Having jumped out on a hillock, we saw 2 fires in the distance. The villages were burning, and between them there was blackness. We heard someone's footsteps. We froze. The footsteps came closer, and soon a man passed us. He was sobbing and moaning. He could not see us in the darkness, nor could we see him, but he sounded like an old man. No one called out to him. When his footsteps were no longer audible, we got up and walked forward into the black space between the villages, peering into the darkness and listening to every rustle. We walked for a long time until we heard a hoarse snort. We stopped. German speech was heard and became silent, and the hoarse snoring was repeated from time to time. Then we heard the sound of a harmonica. It was so dark it was as dark as the eye could see. But if you strain and look closely, you can distinguish something in such darkness. A man, but not the outline of his figure, and against the background of the general darkness even darker blackness, like a vertical stick. We saw 2 such sticks move in the darkness and disappear. The horses seen in such darkness as a darker, shapeless blur. It became clear that the Germans were herding their horses here, and the sounds of the harmonica spoke for the fact that they were not all asleep. What was to be done? To go back was pointless to go around the herd. One could run into a sentry. But how to pass among the grazing horses? If we, in spite of the darkness, could recognize a man, they could also notice us. Pavel Kerma suggested to split into several groups, to stand shoulder to shoulder with each other and thus imitate grazing horses. The proposal was accepted. We organized ourselves, as Pavlusha suggested, and went. We walked between the horses, and Pavel, imitating the horses, snorted from time to time. I was laughing. Suddenly the sounds of the harmonica stopped. We stood still. German voices were heard, but not disturbing. Then the German played the harmonica again. Kermes snorted, and we moved on. In the east, the edge of the sky began to lighten. We came upon some wagons that had been left behind. The wagons were ours, but there were no people around. We started rummaging through the wagons, looking for ammunition or food. We found no ammunition and only a quarter of a duffel bag of millet. It was a happy find. The breadcrumbs were eaten, and millet could help us in a difficult moment. Comrade Commander, an unfamiliar soldier turned to me excitedly. Emergency, Balayan lost his rifle. In our army, the loss of weapons was indeed an emergency, and in our situation aroused suspicion of a desire to surrender. This is the last thing we need, I thought. He'll run away and pawn us all off. With the worst intentions, I went to Balayan, who was unknown to me. He turned out to be a sturdy-looking guy with an innocent, childish face. The soldiers surrounding him wanted to know where he had left his rifle. Balayan was silent. Why are you bothering the man? He's not himself. He's seen things that would make him lose his head, not just his rifle. Ashta Mamedov stood up for him. How do you know what he saw? I was there too. But he didn't drop his rifle. He's still a child. Look, he's not himself. Mamedov wouldn't stop. I don't know why, but I believe Mamedov. Balayan's absent look and childish expression on his face were trustworthy. Leave him alone. He'll get away, I said, and hung a sack with millet on his shoulder. You will carry it. This is our inviolable stock. Then we went onward and soon came upon our own. They were sitting in a deep crevice, dug in case of bombardment, and looked at us with surprise. Oh, who are they? Asked me an officer, evidently the senior of the group. I identified myself and in turn asked, Why are you sitting here? We are waiting for the approach of our own. What theirs? I was surprised. We are surrounded. There are Germans all around. Our surrounded. He was surprised in turn. I don't believe you. You're a provocateur. You're surrounded. There are Germans around. I repeated insistently. The officer was confused. What should we do? Get out of here as soon as possible. I answered and added, You won't get out with such a mass of people. We have to break into small groups. What is your rank? A junior lieutenant. And I'm a major. He got angry. And you don't tell me what to do, you little brat. You're a major in the medical service. Not medical. It doesn't matter. You asked me what to do, and I told you, I said, holding back my resentment. Sure, Kondrashov took me by the sleeve. Let's go. And leaving, he added so that the major could hear. Turkey, he'll ruin himself and his men. Dawn was approaching. The stars were going out, and only in the southeast, close to the horizon, shone a bright star. For some reason I thought, this is my star. We should trust it, and it will lead us to our own. When you don't know the situation, when your life depends on chance, it is best to trust your intuition or even superstition. It's better than sober uncertainty. And it doesn't matter at all if your decision is right. It may not be right, but you act and you think you should, and the soldiers think you know something. I led my group to that star. Then, much later, I found out it was Venus. It was shining merrily in the southeast, and I thought no coincidence. The Germans will make their barricades in the east, and we'll go southeast. Less chance of running into the enemy. We walked through a wheat field. The loaves were standing tall. We tore the ears, rubbed them between our palms, freeing the grains from the chaff, and ate them, drinking water from aluminum flasks. But for the last time water from the flasks had been drunk, it was impossible to replenish the consumption. We walked at night. Just before dawn, we lay down on the ground and, hiding behind tall ears, rested. It was like that for several days. This time I woke up before dawn. It was cold, but I was covered in sweat. Many soldiers were already awake. I unscrewed the cap of the flask, put it to my mouth. It was empty. I was shivering. Not far from me I heard sobbing. Soldier Gurov was crying. Scoundrels, scoundrels! Apke hit him several times, choking on his tears, and suddenly shouted at the top of his voice. All of us, we are all scoundrels. We left the badly wounded. The Germans will shoot them. This question tormented us all. It was a heavy stone on our souls, often causing unbearable pain. How could we help them? Or to die with them? He shouted even louder. Don't shout. There are Germans around. Let them be. I don't want to live. He clawed the ground with his hands and sobbed. Why did I follow you? I'm a scoundrel like the rest of you. It was hysterical. Such hysterics happen sometimes in hospitals. The doctors would stop them with a sedative injection or a simple slap. I slapped him. I slapped him with all my heart. He gotten too big and hurt us all. I was shaking with resentment. Get the hell away from us and die honestly. And we still have to fight. Why are you lying down? Go. I chased him away. Gurevyev was silent. There was a long pause. Then Kondrashov said, We, Gurov, did not run away from the war. We'll come to our own, we'll get back into the ranks, and we will beat the Germans. But you're sulking like a market woman. If we could help them in any way, each of us would spare our lives. Hey, comrade commander, they're coming for us. Gusenov interrupted Kondrashov. I looked back and saw several people descended into the bread. These are the Germans with whom there was a night skirmish over water, he said Kleopko. But why don't they touch us? Objected to him. There are not enough of them. They are waiting for help. What Germans are there? Pavel Kermas intervened in the conversation. It's the Major and his loonies. Enver Husinov clucked his tongue annoyingly. Sonning, they are using us as an advance guard. They will ruin themselves and us. Leaving Pavlusha in charge, I went with Zora to the negotiations. A familiar major came up to meet us. You're following us. In this situation, it's at least illiterate. I began, but the major interrupted my... No. Who are you to tell me what to do? There are too many of you to go unnoticed, but too few to resist the Germans. I tried to explain. Answer me, who are you? Insisted the major. Yes, I'm a junior lieutenant in the airborne troops. We have had special training on how to get out of the enemy rear. I advise you to break into small groups and... The major didn't listen. I advise you not to interfere in my affairs. This is our common business, said Zora. There are many of you. You are bound to be discovered. And we don't want you to die. The major smiled contemptuously. In a normal situation, I would have you, petty officer, and your skinny lieutenant brought before a court-martial. I'll still have that opportunity. As you wish, Major, but if you continue to follow us, I will order to throw grenades at you. B.I. threatened. We turned and walked away. Try it, said the major after us. You're crazy, whispered Kondrashov. Grenades with your own. I'm scaring you. The major is a fool, but he's not a scared one. He won't get rid of us. I understood that. When we got back to our men, we talked about the content of our negotiations. Everyone agreed that we had to get away from them. There were different proposals, but none were certain. We got up and ducked down so that we would not be noticed by the major's group and went away from the previously planned direction. Grigory, whispered Nail Galiev, a silent fellow from Kazan. We won't get away from them that way. There's a trail in the wheat. But how can we get away from them? I looked at the sky. My star shone brightly there among the others. It told me it was time to think about a day's rest. The sound of engines came to us. It grew stronger as we approached, then grew farther away. We realized that somewhere close to us there was a road. Well, there is a possibility to get away from the Major's group. I heard Pavel's soft voice. Ow. Nice. Run along the road for a kilometre. They will lose the trail. We reached the road. It passed almost across our movement. We waited until the rumble of engines subsided and, jumping out on it, ran as long as we had enough strength. Then we entered the bread again. We camped for the day on a small height. From here the road ran quite close. The neighbourhood was not the best, but we found no other place to hide. We were thirsty. Lack of water is worse than hunger. Tired from running, I fell asleep quickly. I dreamed of some waterfalls. Streams of water were pouring down and crashing on the rocks, sounding like music. My mum was pouring water into a pitcher. She was smiling at something. I woke up to some screaming. It was Balayan. When he saw me, he clung to my chest. "Give me water. I'll die. Give me water." Balayan tried to snatch my flask from me. I threw him off me with force. He fell to the ground and howled. I opened my flask and turned it upside down and showed everyone that it was empty. Fyodor Kondrashov was wearing the only flask with the rest of the inviolable water reserve. It was screwed on, with an aluminum cap holding, I think, no more than 25 grams of water. I measured out a cap for each of them and poured 2 for Balayan. He drank them at once. The guys, to prolong the pleasure, drank water through a straw. I didn't have enough water. A few minutes passed and Balayan shouted again. The sound of approaching cars came from afar. I had to gag him. Through binoculars we could see how the cars stopped on the road, half a kilometre before reaching us. We watched them through the binoculars. German soldiers jumped out of them and ran into the breadbasket, in the opposite direction from us. Not after us, I thought with relief. Soon shots were heard from the other side. "Did the Major fall asleep?" asked Gurov. "I don't think it's them," said Pavel Kermes quietly. "They were in this place too quickly. Major is not a major, but our soldiers died before our eyes. Through binoculars we saw groups of Red Army soldiers being led out of the loaves. Some of them were wounded. They were driven into cars covered with tarpaulins. "The guys are missing," said someone. The others were sadly silent. "I will not surrender." "I'll kill myself," said Ashtar. Soon the wind brought to us the smell of burning. The Germans had set fire to the bread to smoke out the Red Army hidden in it. "We must move to another place," said Katukov, and several voices objected at once. "Where to? Stay down and don't move." The fire was burning up. Hot smoky air brought to us by the wind, and the scorching sun made our position unbearable. The fire was approaching us. The fire was threatening to spread across the road. "Then we'll be finished," I reasoned. It was one of the worst ordeals we had to endure. Toward evening the wind died down and then changed direction. It became easier to breathe. The fire reached the road, but did not spread across the road. "There is God," said Sasha Gurov. "We were saved." Waiting for night, we got up and went. The guys kept silent about who were the poor people who were shot by the Germans, but everyone carried a load of guilt in his heart. In my mind, I persuaded myself that it could not have been the Major's men, but it did not get any easier. Now we were walking through dry, unseeded fields. From hunger and thirst, the boys were weakened. The millet which I had entrusted to Balayan to carry, he too had lost in the night firefight, but nobody reproached him. The skirmish was hot and hectic. In it we lost Volodya Durasov, a kind guy from Shoboksiri, who was killed. Sasha Gurov, a cheerful fellow from Sevastopol, was wounded. Balayan carried him on his back. Sasha was wounded in the chest and stomach. He suffered a lot. We came upon a lonely pear tree. The pears had not only fallen, but had already turned into corpse. Everyone greedily pounced on this corpse. But Sasha couldn't eat it. He kept asking for water, but there was no water either. "Yes, and you can't give water to a man wounded in the stomach? Be patient a little longer," I asked Sasha, realizing that I couldn't help him. While we were stuffing our empty stomachs, Sasha Gurov quietly died. We buried him here, under the pear tree. I took the death of Sasha and Volodya hard. Both of them were strong and cheerful guys. That's all I knew about them. They were not from my company. Even in the evening they were full of life. Now they were gone. The firefight was my fault. That night we were trying to get water. We crept silently to the village, but something happened to me. I fell down. My rifle rattled. The German sentry opened fire. A firefight ensued. I woke up when I was dragged out of the battle. I was very weak. We had to call a halt almost every 15 minutes. The men became increasingly gloomy and nervous about everything, including the frequent breaks. I agonizingly overcame fatigue, but I could not go any faster. I blamed only myself for the death of Volodya and Sasha. With every step I was getting worse. More and more often I thought that I had become a burden to everyone, that people would die because of. I began to think of suicide, put a gun to my forehead and end my torment all at once. I just have to make sure that I am not interrupted, I thought. Hey, Pavel, I turned to Kermis, you see. I have completely given up. Now you will lead the group. Pavel looked at me attentively, wanted to object, but kept silent. We found some bushes on the edge of a deep ravine, and there we stopped for the day. The ravine was very deep and wide. On the opposite side of the ravine, 100 meters away from us, parallel to it, was the road. The bushes did not hide us very reliably, but there was no time to look for a more secure place. I lay down and waited for the boys to fall asleep, so that no one would interfere with my passing. But fatigue and illness took their toll, and I fell asleep. I woke up early in the morning. Immediately I remembered my intention. I looked at my comrades. They were awake too. Missed the time, I thought sadly. Now I will have to wait until the next night. Now I won't let myself sleep. I looked up at the sky. My star was shining brightly and cheerfully. Looking at it, I did not think, but felt that it was too early to part with my life, that as long as I was breathing, and I was ashamed of my yesterday's weakness. Bulat Nerdinov brought a lump of paper from the nearest village. The Germans are leaving the village, he said cheerfully. What's this for? Kermes asked, pointing to the paper. It's good paper. Sweet? Kermes tasted it. Nerlev was triumphant. I saw a honey barrel. I went in, and it was covered with paper. I tasted it, sweet. Well, I think it's good. We cut the paper for the number of eaters and ate it. Some of them even cheered up. It's a good paper. That's what you say now? Let's see what happens later. But even then, the paper didn't cause any undesirable consequences. They whipped their horses and rode to Savenskaya. We stayed in the steppe. We bandaged the wounded as best we could. One young soldier had already died. He wasn't familiar to us. We took out a Red Army book from his breast pocket and read Nikolai Ivanovich Zhiltsov. We dug a shallow grave and covered Zhiltsov with earth. In Savenskaya, the situation was diffused, as it is, but around their own and everything is relatively calm. We realized that this calm was only temporary. We found a makeshift medical station behind the village. A doctor and 2 orderlies were working there. We handed over the wounded, took off our shoes, and sat down here behind the village to have some refreshment. War is war, but we had to eat. And what happiness to take off the boots from the strained legs. How light, how free. Even breathing became easier. It's good that the wounded were sheltered, I thought and wondered. So many people died, and we sit here and eat. It's always like this in war. Death, life, suffering and bliss, everything is close by. A German airplane appeared above us. He flew at high altitude. We were watching it, chewing our breadcrumbs. Now he was right above us, and we decided that he was not dangerous to us. If an airplane throws a bomb above you, it will explode far ahead. Pavel Kermes looked up at the sky. Yes, ours. He jumped to his feet and ran. We, too, jumped to our feet and ran as far as time allowed and fell on the stubble. The bombs exploded far away from us. What a bastard you are, Pavlushka, said someone in a heartbeat. I didn't think you were so timid. He excused himself. You will be. Balancing like acrobats on a wire, we returned to the place. At first we scolded Pavlushka for an inappropriate joke. Then we began to laugh ourselves. In war, laughter is caused by the most unexpected and sometimes even seemingly inappropriate jokes. A familiar fighter ran up to us. His uniform was tucked into the gay life. Guys Utvenko showed up. As soon as it gets dark, we'll go for a breakthrough. Everyone be ready. The signal is a red rocket. He told all paratroopers to tuck their uniforms into their pants to distinguish us from the rest, concentrate under that high rise. That's it, he said and ran on. We put on our shoes and, before going to the heights, went to our wounded to report about Otvenko's order. It turned out that they already knew everything there. They are collecting wagons and will take the wounded after us. Vanya Taran looked bad, but behaved courageously. We went under the heights, where fighters of our division were concentrated. On the way we passed the place where the airplane threw a bomb. 2 houses were destroyed. In the dust lay the remains of simple household utensils. The wall of one house was still smoking faintly. At the ruins of the other house, several corpses lay on the ground. A pale elderly foreman stood over them. His head was down. His hands were shaking. I looked at the dead. They were the girls our soldiers had flirted with. You get used to the death of men which you see every day and experience it less acutely. You are a man yourself and you realize that this fate is unlikely to pass you by. But the death of these girls stabbed me in the heart. A man must protect women. But it wasn't just that. A whole storm of feelings rose up in me. Then I realized the value of a woman giving new life and the irreplaceability of these losses. After that, I had a completely different attitude towards women. Time moved languidly slowly. We had already checked our weapons. Magazines with cartridges were stacked in the ammunition bag. We had already tried joking and silently waited for the signal to appear. Already there were fears that time was running out and we would not have enough night to break away from the Germans. Now everyone sat in silence and waited. Some soldier from the division headquarters brought me a duffel bag half filled with letters. At first I resisted. Why do I need them? All in your name, eh? Said the soldier, put the bag on the ground and left. I opened the bag and looked through the letters. They were really addressed to me. The thing is that even at the beginning of the fighting I was sent to Stalingrad to get batteries for radio stations. I was supposed to get them at the crossing. On the way we saw townspeople, mostly women, digging anti-tank ditches. Concrete pillboxes were being set up on the road. And the town looked quite peaceful. At the crossing I was told that the ferry I was expecting would arrive when it got dark. I went into the town library to check out the newspapers. There was a loudspeaker hanging in the hallway of the library, and several people were standing around listening to a broadcast. They were broadcasting letters from listeners who were looking for their parents, children, relatives. I went into the reading room and wrote a letter to the radio in the hope of finding my mother, and many people responded to this letter. The letters were different. Someone wrote that he heard my letter on the radio and wished me good luck in the battle. Some asked if I had seen a soldier with such and such a surname at the front. But the signal to prepare for the breakthrough prevented further review of letters. We came down from the heights and formed a column. A few subcars with wounded men lined up behind the column and waited for the signal to break through. It was getting dark. We waited tensely, but the red rocket did not appear. Finally our artillery started to speak. Not much, said someone. At that time a red flare flew into the darkening sky. Everyone got up at once, formed a column and went forward. Behind us, wagons with the wounded, contrary to expectations. We had no great difficulty in breaking the Germans' barrier. Now that we had broken through, we had to buy time and rejoin our own as quickly as possible. Passing by the battery of our 40-50 guns, which were being removed from their combat positions, I met Captain Boyko, the commander of the anti-tank division. We knew each other well since Asentuki. We hugged. Alive. Alive. Come on. Get in our Willis. Maybe we'll be able to get to the Don in time. We would not have to walk tens of kilometers across this cursed steppe. But I didn't want to leave my friends and other 20-year-old guys like me who were coming with me. I can't. I'll get there on foot somehow, I said. Well, see for yourself, Boyko said, and got into his Willys and drove off. I rushed to catch up with my comrades. We walked in silence. The night was dark. We could hear only the sound of footsteps on the rolled road and the squeak of carts carrying the wounded. The only worry was that during the breakthrough we had lost Pavlusha Kirmas and Leshka Motsok. It's nothing, said Zora Kondrashov, who was walking next to me. When dawn comes, they will be found. Of all my comrades in arms, I especially liked 3, Zora Kondrashov, Pavlusha Kirmas and Leshka Motsok. All of them were different. Zora Kondrashov, before the war, worked as a designer at a factory in Nikolaev. He was almost 3 years older than all of us, and perhaps the most serious of us. I was impressed by his commitment and kindness. Pavel Kermas turned out to be an amazing master in technical matters and a talented military man. Pavlusha could sense danger in battle with some sixth sense and was able to meet it in time. He had a fine ear and rare observation. I loved him for his modesty, warmth of heart, and also for the fact that he never lost his humour under any circumstances. I liked Leshka Motsok for his artistry. His charming face and naturally beautiful, strong voice made him a welcome guest in any company. He was a singer in the company, singing Ukrainian songs intimately. I don't think that my friends were the brightest personalities in our company, but we became friends in Esenchuki, and in battle we tried to be together. We were walking along the dark steppe. On both sides of our column from time to time flew German flares, but this was not followed by any action. The Germans were watching us, but could not do anything. And in this seemingly inappropriate environment, Zora was telling me half-heartedly about his first love. I had noticed that in such circumstances people shared their innermost thoughts. The woman Zora was in love with was the widow of a pilot who had been killed in the late 30s at Kolkhin Gol. She was very beautiful, and many boys his age were pining for her. Zora was among them. When I saw her, he told me, my heart sank. Her sad grey eyes turned my soul upside down. Even her voice, no matter what she talked about, thrilled me. She and I were getting along, but between us there was Leshka Motsok, and she favoured him. He promised to marry her, but he kept dragging his feet, postponing his promise. And we both ended up being drafted into the army. He spoke sadly of this, and his mood passed on to. Meanwhile, morning was approaching. Our column slowed down and stopped. Its front ranks were mixed up and turned into a crowd. A rumour spread through the column. The Germans were ahead. We began to sneak forward to find out the situation. On the wagon stood a captain of small stature and wheezed in a broken voice. What to wait for? We must break through. Otherwise we'll all stay here. Maybe we'd better wait until night. Came a voice from the crowd. Hey, they'll be even stronger by nightfall. We must break through now. Who is with me? Various people began to come up. Having consulted with others, I came too. We'll go to the breakthrough with you. Well, who are they? No. Communications Company of the 33rd Guards Division. How many men? 25 men. That's not much. As many as we have. We'll have a bite to eat and then we'll go. Those 15 minutes to pack. We sat in a circle, opened 3 cans of canned food, took out breadcrumbs, and we went for a breakthrough. We marched without a command in 2 chains. We're walking, and the Germans are silent. Maybe it's a false panic. Maybe there are no Germans. It's our advance guard on fright. Of course it's a fright. We've already gone about a kilometre and everything's quiet. Not a soul in sight. Others moved after us, and then the wagon. And suddenly there was a brutal artillery raid. Shells burst right in the crowd. Many wounded, many dead. We only have carbines, they have machine guns, and the guns are invulnerable, they are far away. The attempted breakthrough was choked with blood. We had to retreat, leaving the corpses of the dead on the field. The wounded were carried on their backs. They concentrated in a deep gully. It was literally full of people. The wounded were moaning, and there was no one to help them. Our cart with the wounded came under artillery fire and probably all destroyed. We bandaged the wounded with individual bags, but they are not enough. Now the enemy's cunning became clear to us. They lured us into a trap to massacre us in the light. The morning came. The sun was rising higher and higher. It was getting hotter and hotter, and there was hardly any shade, nowhere to hide. The wounded were put on the shady side of the ravine, but the closer it got to noon, the less shade there became. The wounded asked for water, but there was nowhere to get it. Sometimes soldiers passed along the ravine, looking for their comrades. One of them came up to me. "I know where there is water, but it's dangerous there." I was bandaging a wounded man. "It's dangerous everywhere. We must help the wounded. If you give me your soldier, I'll show you." "I'll go." Zora volunteered. "We're off. We're waiting. And they're gone." I dragged the wounded into the shade. I opened my bag of letters. To take my mind off the situation for a while, I looked through them again. Most of them were typical for that time letters to the front. "Near fighter, fight bravely. Do not spare the fascists, and we here, on the Labour front, will give all our strength." I have come across quite unusual letters. One of them I remembered for the rest of my life. The letter was written in children's handwriting. It was written by a group of girls from a trade school. It was an ordinary letter to the front, but its main difference was the poetic introduction. It was written in the spirit of the letters that were written in their village, with a pretension to artistry. "Hello, my beautiful angel. Please accept my letter, and you'll believe it's true. It was written out of boredom. First of all, I send you greetings from my heart, and secondly, I suggest that you read it." The rest of the text was written in prose. The girls asked for revenge against the Germans because we are orphans without parents, and our village was burned down, and there's only one old grandfather left who's out of his mind. At first, the reference to my beautiful angel made me laugh. But then I imagined these orphaned children, and the desire to avenge the Nazis raged in me with renewed vigour. But for this it was necessary to stay alive in that terrible meat grinder in which we were caught, and there was almost no chance of that. Another letter impressed me. It was written in competent handwriting. It was written by a mother and father who had lost a son. "We heard your letter on the radio, but when we heard your name, Grigory, so excited that we did not understand your last name. Maybe you are our son Grisha Semyonov. We beg you to answer us." I imagined these elderly people and the extent of their despair, and I felt sorry for them. Close to noon, Pavlusha Kermas appeared in the gully on horseback. He was looking for us in another gully, which ran parallel to ours. There, in that gully, he saw Vasily Ivanovich Nevstreev, the commander of our company. He was on a white horse, and with him 3 other men of ours. "We must gather all our guys." "We'll go to the breakthrough together," said Nevstruev. "We'll gather in this gully." To go to his gully, it was necessary to jump out of ours and about 1 kilometre to run across the open field. "We'll wait for darkness and then we'll go there. It's dangerous now, snipers are hunting," and so we decided. Pavlusha Kermas was never discouraged under any circumstances. He took out an antipyretic bag and began to open it. "What for?" "It's alcohol. We'll drink it before the fight. Better later." "We can't drink it later. We won't think straight. Now's the time." In case of chemical warfare, we were issued gas masks and anti-irritant packets, consisting of 2 ampoules of 25 grams of alcohol. But in order to prevent the soldiers from being tempted to drink alcohol before the chemical attack, they added slaked lime to the alcohol. The inventors of this method were sure that they wittily and simply solved the problem. But the soldiers solved the problem even more simply. They opened ampoules and ran the alcohol through a gas mask. The alcohol was purified from lime and became usable. The method was repeatedly tested by practice and gave the desired result. We did so. The guys who were walking on the water appeared, brought 1 kettle and 2 helmets of muddy water. We would have brought more, but they shoot, bastards. They don't let us go near the water. But we didn't let them get near the water either. What water is there? A puddle. A water, whatever it is, but water. They gave the wounded a few sips in 1 helmet and left some for us. Alcohol was poured into this wine. Brothers, me, said Pavlusha, raising the kettle like a celebratory glass. If any of us remains alive, we will find our parents and tell them what we know about us, and if possible, help them in their time of need. We wrote down addresses, hugged each other, and called each other brothers. I received the water helmet last. It had a thick sediment of earth and a small layer of water on top. As soon as I brought the helmet to my lips, shells began to burst one after another in our gully. They were tearing people to shreds. The gully was full of men, and the artillery raid had turned it into a bloody mess. The air was filled with smoke and cinders. The screams of the wounded could be heard through the ruptures. Oh, Mummy, my arm was torn off. Help? Mothers, help me, I'm dying. Volodya Ostapenko was on his knees, and with his bloody hands was collecting his own intestines, soiled with earth and garbage, trying to return them to his stomach, which had been torn open by a shrapnel. Another shell burst ended his agony. I was thrown against the wall of the ravine. I felt someone pick me up under my arms and carry me out of the ravine. I vaguely remember how we ran down through a hollow field into a neighbouring ravine. Zora and Pavel almost dragged me, but did not leave me. Meanwhile, the shells kept bursting behind our backs. At last, there was a new ravine. We drove down into it on our backs on a steep slope and, finding ourselves at the bottom, lay like that for a long time, trying to catch our breath. There were 15 of us. Are you wounded? Pavlusha asked me. I don't know. I don't think so. I answered and ran my palm over my face. There was blood on my palm. Pavlusha gently ran his hand over my face. There is blood from the ear, a little concussion. It's nothing. You'll get over it. Lie down a little longer and we go look for Nevstruv. So they left, and I was left lying on the ground alone. I was afraid, what if I lost them? I rose to my feet and followed them. Soon I found them. They were standing and looking at a white horse. The horse's front legs at ankle level had been broken by shrapnel and were hanging by the skin. It was also standing on its bones, pinching the grass. It was eerie. We looked at her with horror. There were several corpses lying around. Nevstruev was not among them. We ran over to another ravine, hoping to find Nevstruev there. On the horizon appeared a chain of the enemy. A crowd of fleeing soldiers was approaching us along the ravine. Things are bad. It's panic, he said Kondrashov. Sep them, said the captain who appeared out of nowhere. We stood in front of him and, holding our weapons at the ready, forced the crowd to stop. Where are you running to? There are Germans. Oh, Germans everywhere. We should fight, not run. Who is in command? Yes. The soldiers looked at the captain with distrust. They were afraid of provocation. Know this captain? No one did. The chain of Germans was approaching. The captain, in a hurry, took out of the breast pocket of his uniform his officer's book. He handed it to the crowd that surrounded him. Mutju meist. Yes. He handed over his party card. Command. Today the word communist is perceived ambiguously. The older generation, in its majority, explicitly or secretly respects communists. The youth, also in its majority, considers communists to be the culprits of all their troubles. But back then communists were respected. A communist could not be a traitor. Captured communists were shot by the Germans. I joined the party at the front when my only privilege was to be the first to rise to the attack. I'm proud of that privilege. There was no time to lose, and the captain understood that. You be in charge. Take your men and position yourselves along this line. Do not fire without my orders. Save your ammo. You. he said to us. "Mia, follow me." He ran 50 meters up the slope. He ordered us to dig in for firing while lying down, and he started to dig in himself. From here we could see how the fighters were preparing for defense. Behind them, the edge of the gully, and further on, there was a flat field covered with wormwood and figures of Germans going on the offensive. They were singing a song. We could hear their ragged voices. They were drunk. It made our souls boil with anger. A wounded man came from somewhere in the rear and fell on the ground near us. That's it. It's over. They've all been killed. "No wine," ordered the captain. We knew that wounded men are usually prone to panic. A Messerschmitt flew very low over us. It didn't fire, didn't drop a bomb. Apparently he was assessing the situation. Meanwhile, a chain of Germans came closer. They opened fire with machine guns. The first wounded and killed appeared. Ours answered with single shots. "Oh, save ammunition," shouted the captain. The environment is scary not only because of the enemies around, but because, defending, the army spends ammunition, food, medicine, and there is no possibility to replenish expenses. All approaches are closed. And without ammunition, no matter how heroic you are defenseless. You can't go against machine guns and tanks with bare hands. And then hungry and wounded soldiers are left to either put a bullet in their foreheads or surrender as prisoners. That's what the Germans were counting on. Encirclement was their main tactical postulate. They provoked us to fight so that we would sooner waste our ammunition. As we got closer, the Germans opened a hurricane fire. We have many dead and wounded. The captain, who had been giving commands all the time, fell silent at half a word. I crawled over the corpses of the dead to him. He was hopeless. I had little ammunition left. I couldn't make it till dark. I realized we couldn't get out of here alive. And suddenly I felt that I was no longer afraid of anything, and my soul was seized by an incomprehensible delight. It's called the thrill of battle. I used to think it was a literary fiction. People behave differently in battle. There were big heroes. The whole country knew about them thanks to journalists. There were unknown heroes. There were many more. Real heroism is modest. It is not flaunted. There were those who wanted to be famous. They were heroes. The commander of the platoon of machine gunners, Lebedev, was strict with them, even cruel. Noticing such a hero, it cooled him down. This is not a circus. You have to fight, not be a hero. But he loved tanker Shoran Mazoyan. He's not a hero. He's a real hero. I'd heard a lot about Shoran, but I'd never seen him in combat. Only once, when we were lying in wait for reinforcements, I saw a young boy jump off a tank and rush fearlessly forward, dragging others with him. "That's Shoran," said Lebedev, usually stingy with praise. Shoran became my idol. I admired him and tried to imitate him. I also wanted to be brave and lucky. Noticing this, Ayas Lebedev scolded me. It was at night, between battles. We were lying next to each other in a shell crater. "I need from you not remoteness, but uninterrupted communication," he said tiredly. "And you fuss like a young puppy." I still remember his words, and am grateful to him for them. Lebedev himself fought fearlessly, but sensibly. He did not get on the edge, knew how to wait for a favourable moment. He fought beautifully and bravely. Unfortunately, after the war I lost sight of him. In these battles I did not hit a single tank, did not capture a single prisoner. I had had other functions in the battle, to ensure uninterrupted communication. I remembered that the course of the battle and the lives of many people depended on my work. This war was a war of interaction of huge human masses and equipment. Airplanes, and of communication led to chaos. Anything could happen in battle. A radio could be bombed, its crew could be destroyed, the equipment could be damaged, but communication should not be interrupted. I had to maneuver equipment and radio operators' calculations under fire to be able to restore the equipment, to replace the killed radio operator, or even the entire destroyed calculation. The enemy tried to suppress communication and deprive the commanders of the ability to control the battle. Snipers, artillery, Air reconnaissance worked against us. There was a constant hunt for communicators. Communicators were killed, but there was communication. Of course, for many non-communicator soldiers, the battle was more dangerous and difficult, but the communicator was not just a technical service of the soldiers. When necessary, he acted with rifle, machine gun, grenade, and even bayonet. In the battles near Chernyshevskaya, it did not come to that. 6 days lasted this unequal battle. During this time, our division had time to prepare for defensive fighting. Having suffered heavy losses, we retreated and joined the main forces of the division. The Germans hit us with a crushing blow, but our troops held out. The Germans had to retreat to their original positions. On the field in front of our trenches were left burning tanks and many corpses, ours and German. Then the Germans repeated their attacks twice more, and again with the same result. So ended for our division the first day of defensive fighting. Night came. The rumble of the battle was silenced. The dust from the explosions of bombs and shells settled down, but still in the air was the smell of burning German tanks. Only occasionally the silence was broken by a machine gun burst or the burst of a stray shell. From time to time rockets flew into the sky, illuminating the battlefield with cold light. Weary of fighting, the soldiers fell asleep. But the front did not sleep. Petty officers brought food to the front line, replenished the stock of shells and ammunition. Officers of headquarters worked on maps. Officers of communications were awake at their apparatuses. Orderlies took the wounded to the rear. Funeral teams buried the dead. Intelligence extracted information about the enemy. In the morning barely dawned. In the sky appeared in the German reconnaissance aircraft Focke-Wulf 88. He from the wings to the tail, too thin, separated from each other fuselage. In the sky it resembled a flying frame. We called it so. Frame. Our aviation was not in the sky. The anti-aircraft guns were also silent. They did not want to reveal themselves. Rama flew slowly and quite low. It clearly saw our battle orders, tracked, looked out and reported to their headquarters. Noticing something suspicious, a car on the road or a camouflaged radio, it threw bombs. We'd lose equipment and men. She had no one to fear. We fired at her with rifles, but to no avail. She was well armoured. Once, instead of a bomb, a German pilot threw a pennant with a mocking note. "Don't shoot. Don't scratch my Farben." The impunity and invulnerability of the frame caused us a wistful feeling of annoyance. The battle began with an artillery raid. The shells burst near our trenches, tearing apart the dugouts, sowing death and injury. Then tanks appeared, followed by infantry. They were firing at our trenches, trying to break through our defences. Our artillery was returning fire, trying to disrupt the German fighting order. The rumble of bursting shells, the crack of machine gun bursts drowned out the groans of the wounded. The air was filled with smoke, dust, the smell of gunpowder. Our soldiers cut off the infantry from the tanks with rifle and machine gun fire. Others threw grenades and bottles with a flammable mixture into the tanks. Tank tracks were tearing and clanking with iron. Tanks were blazing. Tankers were thrown out of them, engulfed in fire. The nauseating, pungent odour of burning human meat was maddening. The rumble of battle mingled with the groans of the wounded. The ground covered with corpses, ploughed by caterpillars. And again the Germans rolled back from our trenches to put their troops in order and again repeat the attack. And so every day, several times. There were cases when we had to repel 6 or 7 attacks a day. Weeks went by like that, merging into a nightmare. The Germans were discouraged. We knew this from the prisoners, whose sense of superiority had diminished. They were still convinced of our imminent collapse, but they recognized that they had never encountered such stubborn resistance. One day they dropped leaflets. Infantry was forbidden to read enemy propaganda, but in our units it was looked at calmly. Picking up such a leaflet, I read, "Soldiers of the 33rd Division, you fight like lions. You were able to hold back the onslaught of our troops because half of the non-German divisions acted against you. Now the German division Wolf's Mouth has come to your front, you will be annihilated. Resistance is pointless. Your inept command has betrayed you. The war is lost. It's not too late to surrender. The password is bayonet in the ground. And at the bottom of the leaflet was a note, "Don't forget to bring a pot and a spoon," a hint that we'd be well fed. I still remember the text of that leaflet, and I am proud that the Germans had to admit that we fight like lions. In 2 years of the Second World War, the Germans invaded 11 European countries. It took them 8 weeks to conquer France, a strong European state, and here in the deserted Pryden Steppes, for 2 months they have been unsuccessfully trying to break through our defences and open the way to Stalingrad, all in vain. Today young people have such an idea that we were driven to war almost with whips, and we, as they do now, were looking for an excuse to avoid the army. At that time, the feeling of the need to protect the nation from mortal danger was so strong that we not only did not run away from the army, but even those who were released due to illness or other reasons strived to get to the front. If there was no such feeling, why the hell should people go to their death? Our ranks were noticeably thinning, but German tanks were still blazing at the front of our division. We began to often go into counterattacks. In one counterattack, Petty Officer Ismailov's arm was torn off. He stopped in shock, lifted his hand from the ground and looked at it dazedly, and only then he lost consciousness. The next day we read the inspirational lines of a journalist in the division's small newspaper. Petty Officer Ismailov's arm was torn off. He raised it above his head like a banner and led the men in the attack. We were outraged and, having caught the journalist, who came to the unit to collect material, taught him a hard lesson not to make up heroic tales of this kind. I wanted to raise the morale of the soldiers by this heroic example. He justified himself. We had a special grudge against such journalists. The fairy tale about Pavlik Morozov was composed by the same hounds like this one. Pavlik Morozov was never a role model for us, nor did it occur to anyone to imitate the feat of Alexander Matrosov. We understood that it was a journalistic fake. I respect Alexander Matrosov as any soldier of the patriotic war, but I know what a battle is. A man's chest is not given to him to cover embrasures with it. Even in the state of frontline hysteria, such a feat is foolishness. If I had come across the writer of this feat, I would have used my fists to explain something to him. Only the bosses liked such journalists, and even the most stupid of them. At the front, we never tired of repeating that we should fight, not throw tantrums. Heroism, sacrifice, is a material of a completely different nature. It is committed by a person not for show, but under the influence of circumstances. Heroism is a personal act. I told my officers, don't demand heroism from others. If you can, be a hero yourself. And not only did I teach others, but I did the same thing myself. This soldier destroyed an enemy tank, I thought. Honor and praise to him. He's a hero. But no less a hero is the one who crawled to the tank to destroy it, but was killed. How many such heroes there were? All of them remain anonymous. Bad luck. Did not catch the eye of a journalist, said the hunters for orders. But he did not seek fame and glory. He did what he felt he had to do. When a man, whoever he was, in battle or in peacetime, does the seemingly impossible at the risk of his life, and could not have done it, he is a hero. That's how I thought about heroism. There is Pavlov's house in Stalingrad. The house is really heroic. There were not only soldiers in that house, but also civilians. One woman gave birth there, and the soldiers crawled through the German-occupied territory to get milk for the girl. The Germans tried to storm the house for a long time, but the house did not give up. There were many such houses, but they were not lucky. There was no journalist to see them and glorify them. In our division, armoured gunners led by Boloto became famous throughout the country. His calculation fought heroically and destroyed 16 tanks in one battle. Boloto and his comrades were awarded the Stars of Heroes of the Soviet Union. Already after the war, veterans of the 33rd Division gathered in the village of Chernyshevskaya. Now it is called Sovetskaya. We like to change names. Now Stalingrad, a city that has entered the history of the world, is called Volgograd in retaliation for Stalin's crimes. But Stalingrad is not Stalin, but the city for which 1.5 million good people died, the city of our glory. One word Stalingrad makes our enemies shudder. I'm far from being a fan of Stalin, but I am offended that there is no city with the name Stalingrad on our land. I think that the grief-stricken politicians were sure that they had committed an important political act, but what they did was criminal stupidity. There are a lot of fools among our politicians both before and now for some reason. In the village of Chernyshevskaya, I met Samoylov, a former armoured fighter from the group Boloto. "Why, brother, do you look so pale?" I asked him. "I just got out of prison." "What were you in for?" "MG. I beat up a party boss. He called me an imposter. At the meeting I said I was with Boloto and he shouted, 'You're an imposter,' so I punched him in the face. 'But you're a hero of the Soviet Union.' I didn't get it. Hey, I read in the newspaper that they gave you the star." "Yes, they did, but then they didn't give it to me. But I don't need it. I was an ordinary miner, and I still am." A group of veterans tried to find out what happened. It turned out that the hero was given to another Samoylov who had never been to Stalingrad. Surnamists confused. They said, surname, first name, and patronymic coincide. Don't. For many years, the imposter wore someone else's star of the hero, and modest miner Samoylov was in prison at that time. At the meeting of veterans in Volga, I saw Stalingrad hero Pavlov. He made a depressing impression on me. The most disgusting post-war phenomenon is professional heroes. They went through fire, water and copper pipes. The greatest test for a man is the copper pipes. These are the pipes of glory. Not everyone who has successfully passed through fire and water successfully overcomes the trumpets of glory. I know many heroes of the Soviet Union who worthily endured the burden of glory and did not become professional heroes. Pavlov in Volgograd did not get drunk. His face during the whole meeting of veterans was ugly swollen. His eyes were swollen from vodka, and he behaved like an animal. The admirers had drunk him. It was offensive, disgusting, and pitiful to look at him. I knew other professional heroes of this kind. One of them claimed that he repeated the feat of Matrosov 3 times, not realizing that this only compromised himself. But in Stalingrad, I know it, he was a real hero. Only he did not realize it then and was a good, modest guy. But let's return to the battles in the Big Bend of the Don. The Germans twice replenished their units with fresh forces. We were also waiting for reinforcements. The Germans with fresh forces rained fire from guns and mortars on the division. From above, bombs fell on us. One after another tank attacks followed. With the forces of the tank division, the Germans attacked our 84th Regiment. The attacks were repeated one after another. By evening, the defence line of the regiment was broken through, and armoured tank columns formed a kind of corridor. In the resulting gap, the Germans tried to enter their fresh 113th Infantry Division. It was to seize the crossings across the Don. Communication between the division headquarters and the 84th Regiment was interrupted. All radio operators were killed. The division commander ordered to restore radio communication with the regiment cut off from the division by any means. Pavel Kermes and I, through the tank corridor, snuck into the cut-off regiment and witnessed when the Krasnodar military school came to the aid of the regiment. The brigade commander perked up. He sat down at the topographic map of the head of the school and began to explain the task. "And what about armament?" asked the head of the school. "What weapons?" "Did not understand corrida. We have no ammunition at all, and not everyone has rifles." I saw Corrida turn pale and Jello's flared. He threw his pencil down on the map and said stiff, "I'll give you ammunition. You'll get your weapons in battle?" In the morning the cadets went on the attack. Many of them didn't have rifles. Nevertheless, the Germans were driven off, so much so that they occupied settlements not indicated in the plan. "The German is exhausted," said the soldiers. "There is no longer in him the same resilience." The adjutant of the division commander came. "It is urgent to equip an observation post. At 5.0, Yudvenko will come here to lead the battle." "We won't have time." You said. "I have only 2 men available. I'm the 3rd. The rest are on duty." All right. We'll send you 4 sappers to help you, promised the adjutant and quickly left. I called 2 free men and together with them began to dig a place for an observation post. Time passed and the sappers did not appear. I anxiously looked at my watch, peered into the darkness. Whether the promised sappers were coming, the front was empty. I looked in the distance. 4 men were walking, but for some reason they were passing by our trenches. Maybe they didn't find us. I threw down my shovel and ran towards them, and up and asked them, panting from running, "Are you guys sappers?" "No. We are Uzbeks." They answered me seriously. And the division commander never came to us. Obviously, it was no longer necessary. The Germans were driven westward, but the order was to retreat, and the division retreated. There were no other orders, and the soldiers, accustomed to the incessant fighting, languished in obscurity. Meanwhile, attempts to establish communication with the army headquarters ended in failure. There was some kind of bedlam on the air. Sometimes it was possible to hear the army radio, but immediately after that a jammer appeared and communication was interrupted. Our staffers were nervous, scolded the communicators for their ineptitude, and demanded that I sit behind the key myself. They were sure that I could do more than my experienced communicators. Finally, the radio station was fixed, more powerful and self-powered. It worked if the operator rotated bicycle-like pedals and thus produced current to power the station. Georgy Kondrashov worked at the station. He managed, despite the bedlam of jammers, to hear and record several columns of the ciphergram. A Smersh officer came running. "Do you trust your radio operator?" "I do." "Do you know what he wrote down?" "The content of the radiogram is encrypted. Ask the coder." "Request it again." "Request again." Through the howling of jammers, we receive part of the ciphergram. The order to retreat and concentrate in the village Yablochnaya is confirmed. It can't be a provocation. The vigilant Smersh officer is checking. The ciphers are ours. We did not know what our command knew. Unable to break through the defences held by 9 airborne divisions, the Germans struck on the flanks of the front and came to the Don. We found ourselves in the sack. The division commander, Udvenko, gave the order to retreat to the village Yablochnaya. It is difficult to describe what a soldier experiences when retreating. How many bloody battles, how many comrades we lost. All in vain? We are going east again, leaving the land. People who hoped that we would protect them. In the ranks there's unhappy talk. Retreating, when will it end? We could have chased the Germans all the way to the border, but they order us to retreat. Traitors? Come on, boy. He could have driven them all the way to the border, you fool. Well, not all the way to the border, but we could have attacked. They've been exhausted the last few days. That's a fact. Exhausted. We still have to fight and fight. And I say they're exhausted. Isn't that what they were a month ago? That's true. How many of them we've crushed, how many we've burned, and how many of our men died. Why? And what guys they were. Oh, don't whine. It's sickening without you. We didn't know that while we were holding back the German onslaught, while tanks were blazing in the Zadonsky steppes, guns were rumbling, bombs were falling from the sky to the ground, and people were dying, dying all this time, hundreds of trains with soldiers. Ammunition were moving towards Stalingrad and the Caucasus equipment. Ammunition organized defense nodes, dug trenches and anti-tank ditches, built long-term fortifications, evacuated the civilian population of the Kuban beyond the Volga River, exported grain, cattle. Our command was preparing for the general battles. The loss of Caucasian oil would mean for our country an imminent defeat. You can't do much with bare hands in such a war. The loss of Stalingrad would paralyze the delivery of oil along the Volga, would deprive our army of rail and other land communications, and therefore maneuver. Hitler counted on it, developing the Operation Kremlin, before the country and its people faced a real threat of death. This was understood and our command. We tiredly wandered along the road. Above us high loomed frame, causing us anxiety. Then it disappeared and never appeared again. The sky was blue and calm. For many hours we had been walking along the flat, deserted steppe, smelling of wormwood and dust. The sun was scorching mercilessly. The soldiers were exhausted, and the way they were abandoned things and whole warehouses. The first signs of a real retreat. Things were thrown out of the trucks right on the road, and the soldiers walked indifferently over new uniforms, piles of sugar and cereals. At first, the abandoned things aroused in me a noble anger. Cowards, panickers. They should be prosecuted. But I began to see more and more of them. I found a rifle with a telescopic sight and picked it up. It's not to be wasted. The rifle was heavy, much heavier than my carbine, and yet I couldn't help but pick it up. The soldiers were walking glumly, exhausted from heat and fatigue. The column moved unevenly, slowing down, quickening its pace, then somehow stopping. The same happened with another column walking parallel to us. The foreign column did not arouse any interest in us, but next to us there were girls. Dressed in soldiers' uniforms, they could hardly move their legs. Our boys became animated and started joking. Girls, let's get acquainted. The girls had no time to get acquainted, but the boys didn't stop. Us, girls, come with us. You won't be lost with us. But you won't go home either, someone joked darkly. The girls were pleased with the attention of the boys. Some of them smiled. Our column picked up the pace and overtook the girls. We entered the village of Savenskaya. On the outskirts of the village there was an adobe hut and a well near it. Exhausted by thirst and crossing, the soldiers rushed to the water. Putting their kettles under the bucket raised from the well, they drank, smiling blissfully and quacking with pleasure. Someone, throwing off his uniform, drank water on his head. Somebody had already settled down in the shade of the hut and was soaking breadcrumbs, intending to refresh themselves. And the soldiers were still crowding at the well. At that moment a shell exploded in the thickest part of the crowd. Then another and another. Everything was mixed up in a flash. Someone rushed to the side, someone pulled out the wounded. Someone was already lying breathless on the ground. I saw Vernia Taran staggered, ran a few steps, fell down and could not get up. I went back to him, picked him up in my arms and carried him. I don't know where to. The explosions stopped as suddenly as they had begun. Tired, I laid the wounded man on the ground. He was covered in blood. 3 more wounded men were brought in. They called for medics, but there were no medics. Our soldier Semyon Krasanov came running, panting from running, said, pointing somewhere in the direction. There are wagons there, 2 with property. They picked up the wounded, carried them to the wagons, dropped the equipment, put the wounded on the wagons. To Yabloknaya. There's a medical centre there. The wagons moved off. We ran alongside. I saw that there were much more of us, 40 to 45 men. According to my calculations, Yabloknaya was 6 kilometers away. Finally, we began to get tired and could not run further. Don't wait for us. Drive to the village. Look for the infirmary, I said. Now the wagons went. At that time, 2 horsemen appeared from behind the hillock. They galloped towards us and shouted something. The carts stopped and turned back. The riders rode towards us. Their horses were without saddles. Go back, they shouted. There are Germans in Yabloknaya. How many? A cloud. There are Germans in Savenskaya.